How you doing, everyone, and welcome to Direct Dreadnought Gundam and More on PS4. And this is the Tier 5 Jupiter Arms Dreadnought, the Monarch, with the Aegis skin and a nice gray-white paint job so that it looks like an Imperial Star Destroyer. But that's not why we're here. This video is, of course, about the new Dreadnought August release patch notes, which is very exciting. Number one, because we are getting updates very frequently for a game that isn't as popular as, let's say, Fortnite, but is still hanging on, mainly because of you, the community, and because the game is a lot of fun, and because we are getting a lot of attention and addressing of our views towards balance, and we're still getting new content in the form of market items and new game modes and such, and I think that is just great. But before we get into any of that, I just want to drop a quick hello and plug to Antonio, aka Dr. Bree 75. Dr. Bree also has a YouTube channel and is a master of many ships and is friends with all of the most notable players in Dreadnought. And on top of all that, Antonio really likes to put together nice videos with a wide variety of ships, a wide variety of play styles, to very, very good music. It's very fun to watch, and he puts in little coloring effects whenever he gets a kill or assist, and of course you get to hear his voice sometimes, along with the voices of some of your favorite players, or who knows, maybe players that you just despise. But that is all up to the gameplay, that is all up to the fun of the game. But if I were you, it's really hard to get a YouTube channel off the ground. I've been doing this for quite a long time, and even though I could have done videos about politics or comedy or something else, I chose my creative medium to be Dreadnought, and so has many of the players of Dreadnought, and it is really difficult to get your channel going. It is very difficult to get that first set of viewers, or to get the word out there that you are indeed posting Dreadnought videos, Dreadnought replays. So if you would like to take a little portion of your time and take a look at Antonio's videos, they're very, very good and a lot of fun to watch. And if you're a Dreadnought fan, I guarantee you'll like them very much. So thank you very much, Antonio. You've been a supporter and fan of the channel for a long time, and I too am a supporter and fan of your channel and of you in general, because you are one of the better players in Dreadnought, and it's always been a lot of fun to fight alongside and against you in the game. So let's jump right in while my Dreadnought is warping around and blowing stuff up on Amirani to the actual notes for the Dreadnought August release patch notes. First of all, we have a new ship. It is a ship that was locked away in the Ice of Ceres, and we've been going a little more and in depth into the lore of Dreadnought, which I think is great. And apparently a Jupiter Arms flagship was trapped in the ice while Ceres was blowing up. And of course the Ceres map, Ceres is an asteroid in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, and there is a lot of scum and villainy and mining going on the biggest asteroid in that belt, which is Ceres. It is very close to home if you are living in Sinley Bay, and it is Ryugu Haven, the map that we play on in the game. This ship was locked away, and the crew was very bitter about it, and now that they've been freed from Ceres, they are out for revenge against their former masters. So that's a pretty cool ship in lore, and you can find it in the marketplace. But let's get right into the balance changes. First of all, some of you have noticed, like I have, that a Oberon artillery cruiser will sneak up on you and get a siege mode from your flank and do a lot of damage, almost taking you out. So siege mode is the first thing on the docket for balance changes, and of course they've lessened the proximity detonation and reduced the damage slightly, not too much. For example, in Tier 5, the damage was 78-75 per shot, and now that is down to 70-90, so not a huge shift, but just a little bit of tweaking to make sure that this particular module is not overpowered. And now we get to hell lasers. This is kind of big news because a lot of people use hell lasers. Hell lasers used to be just something to take out nukes, but then they decided to buff them by enabling them to take out torpedoes and missiles as well. The trade-off is that there's not as many lasers shooting, but they can shoot things down at very far range. The problem with this is that because of their lower refire rate, they were not shooting down nukes while they were shooting down missiles and torpedoes. And also this made the normal anti-missile lasers kind of not as good as the hell lasers slash anti-nuke lasers, so they have changed it back so that the anti-nuke lasers only target nukes and that the normal anti-missile lasers target everything else and do so very, very well. So that is an interesting change. Dreadnought heavy and light torpedoes. I have heard this on my channel comments and in game chat and in the Dreadnought chat on PS4 so much, in that when you really look at it and you look at the stats, there is no real difference between light and heavy torpedoes as far as stats go, but light torpedoes are so good because they don't trigger an anti-missile warning. They're so fast, so deadly. Heavy torpedoes are very slow, and there's no advantage to taking them, unlike with Corvettes, where the heavy torpedoes in Corvettes have a lower cooldown and are slower but hit hard, whereas the normal torpedo salvo for Corvettes has a much longer cooldown and has many projectiles which can be shot down, and you also get a missile warning for them. So now the heavy torpedoes have a bit of a damage buff and a slightly less cooldown. And this is to make sure that one module isn't always being used over another, and it's just tweaking the module so that you have to wait longer to use light torpedoes, but there are certain advantages with them. And now with heavy torpedoes, the cooldown is much less, the blast radius is higher, the damage is not too substantial, but it has a couple grand more damage at tier 5, and that scales down into the lower tiers as well. So now there is a slight advantage to taking heavy torpedoes over light torpedoes in certain circumstances, where light torpedoes now are better to take against Corvettes and lighter craft, but you do have to wait longer to use them. This is big news, and I have play tested this a lot, and I really, really like this a whole bunch. Oberon Corvettes. I've said this many times on the channel. Oberon Corvettes move so awesomely, but they're very slow. They don't have the hull that Aquila Vector does. They definitely don't have the speed that Jupiter Arms does. But you can do some pretty cool maneuvers if you use the thrust amplification, and you can do some really sick attacks and vectoring. But their main guns were really bad, so you were usually trying to use your secondary guns as much as possible, and that's really bad for a ship. And they addressed that with Dreadnoughts by really amping and buffing Dreadnought main gun weaponry to try and take those secondary repeaters down a notch without hurting the Dreadnought class. And now they're trying to repeat that very successful balance adjustment on the Oberon Corvette. So the Oberon Corvettes used to fire, when you're in tier 3, they would fire once and have a wait time and fire again. Then with the Medusa, they'd fire 2 or 3 times, wait, fire 2 or 3 times, and that was kind of the maximum of the effectiveness of this burst fire. And by the time you got to the Mithras, when you picked a spot and pressed the trigger, all 4 volleys would go to that one spot, and you really couldn't, like you can with other ships, you can't adjust the fire, so all of your shots would wind up missing, or maybe the tail end of 2 or 3 shots would wind up missing, and your fire, your damage over time, and your accuracy was really poor. So what they've done is adjusted this Corvette so it fires 1 shot at a time, but the rate of fire is increased per tier. And excuse my sound effects, your tier 3 is going to be pew, pew, pew. Tier 4 is going to be pew, 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 pew. And of course, your tier 5 is pew, 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 pew. So now you can adjust and sweep your fire onto a target. So if you start missing, you can correct your aim and get much more effective use of your ammo. You can have a higher DPS, adjust your accuracy. You're not firing a burst, and if that burst misses, you have to wait a second or two to fire again. Now it's really, really effective, but this has affected the ammo. You'll find that your ammo depletes much quicker, but that's what you have secondary weapons for, and also there are officer briefings that will help adjust that as well. But I find that now you can use the Oberon Corvette at long range with the bolt guns and then close in and get really good damage with your main guns pretty darn accurately. Or you can now use it to target warp onto a target, use your main guns, switch to plasma, go back and forth while they're reloading. It makes the ship much more competitive without detracting from the other two mega corporations Corvettes, and I really like that. And while we're on the subject of Corvettes, plasma turrets. Usually plasma turrets were only used for target warp builds where you warp really quickly onto an enemy artillery cruiser or something and you unleash with plasma, because plasma, unless you're attacking a really slow dreadnought, plasma really wasn't very effective outside of 1,000 meters. It missed a lot and it had a very terrible spread. It was very, very bad, but it did pack a lot of punch at very close range. But a lot of times it was better to use the upgraded, the buffed laser turrets, which were buffed a couple months ago, or it's better to use bolt cannons at range and close in and use your main guns, except for, of course, the Mithras, but now the Mithras is fixed. However, we are getting into a tighter cone of fire and a faster shot speed for the plasma turrets, and this is really good. It's roughly twice as fast shot speed, and the spread has been reduced by half. So that is very good. Now plasma is not just usable for particular builds on Corvettes, but now you can use it, especially in Tier 4 where you don't have access to bolt guns. You can use the plasma turrets at that medium Corvette range, which is granted much shorter than other ship classes, but now you have some game in that 2,000 to 3,000 meter range, and you can lay on the punishment while you're reloading, or if your guns are unsuited for that range, such as with the Netron and other Aquila Vector Dreadnoughts. So I think that is great. I recently got a comment on my channel about how hard it was to get to veteran mode. We have our elite experienced players in legendary mode, and we have the bulk of the population, which seems to be picking up again over the last couple months, which is great, by the way. But it's really hard in recruit mode to get matches for certain people, especially in certain time brackets. So, Proving Ground scoring. Now Proving Grounds, you can earn around 75% of what you can get from a team deathmatch as far as experience and rewards. So if you can't get a match in recruit, you can play Proving Grounds, and let's face it, when you're in recruit and you don't know the ins and outs of the game, when you're a legendary player, for the most part, bots are not as good as humans. But when you don't know the ins and outs of the game, you're not experienced, bots can be very challenging. So when you're in recruit mode, practicing against bots in the Proving Grounds can not only help you train and get used to the game and get used to what ships you like and what kind of builds you like, but will now give you a substantial increase in experience, so that will help make your time in the game more efficient, more profitable, and then you can get to veteran mode much quicker so that you can get into the PvP experience that we all love. Now let's go into bug fixes. Siege mode, projectiles that explode on proximity instead of direct hits are no longer invisible. That's a big thing because you don't want large chunks of your hull to be disappearing and you can't tell where the shots are coming from, where they're exploding. So that's a huge part of it. If you're being hit, you need that reaction time to find out where the attack is coming from so you can dive from cover or take evasive action of some sort. And you can't do that if projectiles are invisible. You've all been hit by siege mode before. If you see the explosion on your left side of these siege mode shots, you're going to duck or go right. You're going to take appropriate action to get out of that danger. If you can't see the danger because the shots are invisible, that is a huge loophole in the game, and they have fixed that. Market Bundles tab. Fix an issue where decal bundles wouldn't show up unless you filtered them out and back in. Well, to some players that's not big, but to a lot of players the UI is not optimized, and this is a step in the right direction to optimize our UI, so when you want to buy something in the market, you're not wasting a lot of time or having to do anything to go in and out or do any sort of unnecessary action to get the product that you want, and I think that's great. So that wraps up the Dreadnought August release patch notes, and I'm so happy that we're getting yet another patch soon after the last one. It means that we're being paid attention to and that the game is still alive and the game is still getting better and more balanced, and that we're still getting new content to the game. I will do a video to shout out to Antonio, Dr. Bree 75, coming soon, so you can see some of the highlights of his channel. And of course, I have some awesome replays that I'll be releasing over the next week or so. Well, that's it for me for now, and I'll see you soon in Sinley Bay.